I'm sorry, I posted on YouTube, but I'll put the link in Moodle. All right, how's everybody doing?
Doing pretty good.
Doing good.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in, all the work to do. I know your other class is slamming hard too. Then smoke and fires and being sick and all that kind of stuff, having ill family members, it's a real challenge. It's a real challenge. So do your best and always stay in touch with us if you can't do assignments or you just need to talk or anything like that. We'll do our best to figure out how to be helpful to you.
You put yourself on mute.
You're muted.
Sorry, thank you. What I'm going to do today is talk about the midterm assignment and the role play. The role play is really practice for the midterm. And then I created as I was getting myself organized for talking today, I realized I could put it in a PowerPoint and post it up. So I posted that up on Moodle about 9 o'clock this morning. So we're going to look at a couple of documents. One is the instructions for the midterm, which is in the assignment section. We're going to look at the template for writing down your interview, which is also in the assignment section. And then we're going to look at a sample of that kind of transcription, which is in the assignment section. Then I'm going to go over the PowerPoint, which is in the Moodle page for today, on the skills that you're going to use in the interview. And then there's 3 role play scenarios that we're going to use for role plays. And I think the way it worked in the first class was we're just going to do it as 2 people in a room rather than 3, just because of the time constraints to give you enough time to go through an interview. And I think that worked okay. All right. What I'm going to do is share my screen and I'm going to start going through the instructions, and let me get my chat box open. If you have questions and you can't get me to stop talking, put it in the chat and I'll be sure to look at those before we move on. So let me share my screen, get this centered up. Okay, can everybody see my screen now? Okay, good. So a lot of the skills, well, all of the skills that are in the midterm are skills that you've either practiced in class through the activities that you did or through the discussion board questions. By the way, you guys did a really good job on the discussion board looking at summarizing and open-ended questions. So that was you had some really in-depth conversations about that, and that shows that you're really getting the concepts and practicing them. So what we're going to do is use the skills you've learned in the first half of class, either through the discussion boards or the weekly exercises or your readings in the textbooks, to develop an interview with somebody. And I'd like it to be a role play interview for a couple of reasons I'll talk about later. But what we're going to do first, after we go over the PowerPoint, is we're going to practice these skills in class. We're going to break into groups of 2 so that you can each have a chance being the interviewer and the other one's the interviewee. Excuse me. I have 3 role play scenarios because sometimes it's a time saver to have somebody say, here's some role plays to try. If you have a role play of your own that you want to try, that's fine too. Excuse me. During your role play, you're going to demonstrate these lettered skills, and these are the same skills that are on the midterm, using open-ended questions, using the service seekers language, etc. And I'll go over those in the PowerPoint in just a minute. After you completed the role play, they'll take about 20 minutes for the role play. You're going to have about 5 minutes. So the person who's the interviewee, who is doing the role play, they're going to give feedback to the interviewer about which of these skills they did really well. Maybe a couple of sentences that seem to strike you as useful sentences to ask, like a really well-phrased question. And then general feedback. And we'll take about 5 minutes to do that. And then we're going to flip roles, and you'll have 20 minutes to interview and 5 minutes for feedback. Then we're going to come back as a large class and do this feedback as a whole class about what worked and what went well and what you need to work on some more. So that's what we're going to do in class today. While I'm on this document, I'll go over the assignment instructions. During the week, interview a family member, a friend, a coworker, a colleague, a classmate, I ask that you don't use a client because I'm asking you to audio or videotape this so that you have the actual words the person said. And that requires extra consents from clients, and many agencies don't want you to do that. So it gets too messy. So I would say, please just do this with someone who is not a client. Tell them, though, that it's a role play for class that you're taking, and ask them to come up with a problem that they're willing to talk about. It can be made up, but sometimes the best role plays are the ones where the person's talking about something that's real for them, but it's got to be something they're willing to share with you. So then record that on your phone, either audio or video recording, because you're going to need to transcribe it. And I'll show you an example of what that looks like. So when you transcribe it, you don't need to put in ums and long breaks. If there's some silence, just put that there was silence here. But then you're going to indicate which skill you used. And I'll show you on the template how to do that. You're just going to put in the letter of the skill that you used in the appropriate column. And then you're going to add your own comments about your use of the skill. So if you did it really well, or you did it really poorly, or if you find an opportunity where you said, oh, I really should have inquired about cultural issues at this point. So my goal here is for you to know this skill when you see it. Not all interviews go well, and you're not able to demonstrate all skills in every interview. So in my classes, you get equal credit for doing it badly and correcting it and acknowledging that you could have improved it, or doing it well and commenting on it. So maybe you used a closed-ended question. If on the other side of the page you said, I should have used an open-ended question here, or this is the open-ended question I should have used, you get equal credit for that as if you'd done that question in the interview. So then after you've transcribed it and looked at what skills you used and filled in the skills, and then added your own comments, I want you to write a 2 to 3 page reflection paper that focuses on the skills you've learned so far, the skills you want to focus on during the rest of the course, and how your personal awareness about your biases and strengths impact your professional practice. This is an APA paper with a couple of exceptions, but for APA, it's got to be 1-inch margins all the way around, 12-point type, use Times New Roman font, nothing fancy. I do need a title page with your name and the name of the assignment and the date. And in the header, please put your name and make sure you have page numbers in the header so I can keep track of that if I need to. And one thing I haven't put on here is if you're conducting your interview in a language other than English, please put the language that you conducted the interview in. That helps me know that you're not only transcribing, but you're also translating. And that needs to count towards your work because that's extra work for you to do. So the transcription and the reflection paper go in the same document. And I'm going to open up a copy of the transcript. This is an example of one from last year. I'm going to scroll to the top so you can see what it looks like at the beginning. So this looks like about 4 pages. So these are the skills, and they're lettered, so you don't have to write the whole thing out. So this person just decided their name was counselor and the client's name was client. You can use your name, make up a name for the client, or you can do it this way if you like. And the transcript is what they said and what the other person said, and the skill they used plus their comments on their skill. Then my comments on this paper are in colored type, so you can see what I added. So here she says, wonderful, what can I do for you today? That's an open-ended question. A. G is increasing cultural awareness. I think that's evident when you go down a little bit farther. And B, using the service seekers language. Okay. So she's talking a little bit about that. So it's a good question. What can I do for you today? So now here the person is probably summarizing or paraphrasing. Okay. So you're struggling with your drug addiction. You haven't seen your kids in a few months due to an open case. Tell me a little bit more about how CPS got involved. So this is another way to ask an open-ended question. It's more of a command, tell me, rather than asking, but it gets you that level of detail that you need in open-ended questions. So this is her comment. I wanted to show the client that I'm listening, and from what she says, that is where my questions evolve, which is great. So when you turn in your paper, I'm going to be downloading your paper, commenting in it, and sending it back to you as an email attachment so that you can get my comments embedded in your paper. It's just an easier way to do it right on the spot rather than, it's an odd way that Moodle has us do feedback on papers that doesn't work for this kind of transcript. So she's got 1, 2, 3, 4. You really need a solid 4 pages of transcript to be able to demonstrate most of the skills. I don't think that most people will do all of the skills, but you need to do a lot of the skills, right? You need to demonstrate a lot of the skills, or say where you could have used that skill in your interview if it wasn't in your interview. 3 pages is really the minimum. That barely gives you enough interview to demonstrate your skills. And don't send me more than 5 pages, even if your interview went on that long. Most people need to record about 20 minutes of an interview in order to get enough material for this. So try to keep your interviews about at least 20 minutes long so that you have enough information to use. So then at the end, it says 3 to 4 page reflection paper. This was last year's. I've cut it down to 2 to 3 pages. So in the instructions, it says a 2 to 3 page reflection and has specific questions for you to answer. So make sure that you answer all of those questions. So I'm going to close this so that you can see this is what the template looks like. And if you can't, for some reason, can't use this, this is written in Microsoft Word. If for some reason you can't use this, make it look as close to this as you can. And it's okay if you have it formatted as landscape. You can even format the rest of your essay landscape because you can't change formatting in the middle of a paper very easily. If you use the upright one, I forgot what it's called, the upright layout. Let me see what it's called. Orientation, portrait orientation, that's fine too. Whatever works for you is fine. Don't try to change it in the middle of your paper because you'll spend too much time trying to figure out that command in MS Word. So I'm going to stop sharing right now and ask what questions folks have.
I had a question. You were saying that if we correct ourselves with some of the questions that we could have asked or would have been better, we would receive full credit for that as well?
Yep, absolutely.
With the sample that you have for the transcription, do you have any idea of like how many minutes or how long that interview was? Just so we can kind of.
Yeah, I don't know for that particular student, but most folks have told me that a 20-minute interview has given them enough information.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, if you have more questions, put it in the chat. If you think of them after, you know, we've gone through some of this. What I wanted to do next was go through just a discussion of the skills. It's all been touched on in your text so far, but let's go ahead and take a look at this PowerPoint. So let me share my screen again and pull up the PowerPoint and get it started from the beginning. So everybody can see the document or have a copy of it yourself. Good. So this is the one we focused on the most because it's actually the one that's frequently the hardest to do. Our casual speaking styles tend to be closed-ended questions. So interviewing somebody from a social worker perspective is a different style of speaking and conversing than what you would do casually with your family and friends. I don't know if it was in this group, somebody posted up somewhere on one of the discussion boards that their mom was like, why are you so different when you're asking me these questions in the role play interview, you know? And I'm like, yeah, because it is different. And in my last class, folks commented that this was really different than just talking to a friend or a family member. And you're right, it is. It's a more formal way of asking questions because you need to get specific information in order to be helpful as a social worker. So open-ended questions cannot be answered with a yes or no. They have to be answered with description. So if you say to somebody, can you shut the door? Even though you vocally framed it as a question, they can say yes or no to you. If you ask somebody, did you say that to your mom? right? Again, sounds like a question, but it's really not an open-ended question because the answer is yes or no. What did you say to your mom? So even vocally, they sound different. So make sure you put the who, what, when, where, and how at the beginning of a sentence, particularly if you tend to phrase your sentences, can you or do you? Just put the what in front of it. What do you, what can you, where do you, how can you, so that you get yourself phrasing questions that are open-ended. The reason we ask this is you have to get detail from the consumer for a bunch of reasons. First of all, you need to know what's important to them, and you need to use that for goal setting because you want to be sure to use the consumer's goals. You use it to obtain their language and their descriptions, which then you reuse in the interview in a couple of different ways that we're going to talk about in a minute. Asking open-ended questions also slows down an interview because if you've got 10 questions you need to ask somebody and they end up being yes or no answers, you've just done your interview in 5 minutes when you really need to have a half an hour perhaps to talk to this person to really get information about what is going to be useful to them. And it also lets the client know you're paying attention to what's important to them, which is a strengths-based and client-centered way of conducting social work, which is part of the values of the social work profession. The second skill is using the service seeker's language, which we just talked about. By using open-ended questions, you're going to get their language. It's client-based and client-centered and strengths-based, but it also helps keep the interview focused on what's important to the client or consumer. So you're not just bouncing around with questions. When you don't know what to ask, the next question to ask somebody, ask them a question about what they just said and use their language. So that will help you move the flow of the interview in the direction that's going to stay closer to what the client's, what's important to the client. And it also lets you ask a lot more detailed follow-up and clarifying questions. So when somebody says, particularly a phrase you're not used to, you can say, what do you mean by X, Y, or Z? Or, you just mentioned this, what do you mean by whatever that phrase was? So it gives you much more information about the consumer, and it also means you're understanding what the consumer is really saying. Good old paraphrasing and summarizing. Paraphrasing we did this week, and I've underlined in this example and the next one what's important about the difference between paraphrasing and summarizing. So in paraphrasing, which we just covered this week, you use your own words to recap what the client or consumer has said. So if they say something like, well, I'll give that example in a second. It's going to keep you, again, focused on what's important to the consumer. And it's also used to speed up an interview when you need to. It's good to kind of recap what the person has just talked about for the last 10 minutes, particularly if you need to move on to a different question or another part of the interview, if you need specific information for an intake or what your agency does. So it helps you kind of wrap up part of an interview and move on to the next part. It's also really useful when developing care plans or treatment plans and gives you like a double check to make sure you heard and understood what they've really requested. So I might say something like at the end of a wrapping up part of an interview, at the end of an interview. So I just want to make sure I've got everything that we've talked about. You said that you need assistance with housing, transportation, and there's some issues with your special needs child in the school that we need to work on some more. I'm using my own words in that example. And that way the consumer can say yes or no, wait a minute, I want to make sure I want to do this, or no, I need to do something else. So that gives you good clarifying and instructions with the consumer. And it's helpful for wrapping up the interview for the same reasons I've listed above. Now, summarizing is using the client's words, and it slows down an interview when needed. So you're using the actual client's words to say what they've just stated. Somebody might talk about, well, I live in this ramshackle, hoopty-ass housing project. I'll use a client's language. So you've talked about living in this really ramshackle, hoopty-ass housing project. What kind of housing are you looking for instead? So that's an example of summarizing and using the client's language. Again, this keeps the interviewer focused on what's important to the client and consumer, which is strengths-based and client-centered, and you slow it down. I've got an example down here. It's also really helpful when formulating follow-up questions or checking in with somebody to make sure you understand what they said. So this is an example of something I said on Friday when I was talking to somebody about housing. I'm not sure I understood what you're requesting because the consumer told me a whole bunch of different things and I wasn't sure where he was going, and I really wanted to understand what kind of referral I need to make. So I'm not sure, what I said was, I'm not sure I understand what you're requesting. A few minutes ago, you asked for a referral to the housing guy so you can get one of those free hotel rooms. What the client's exact words are in quotation marks here. But now you've stated you don't want to be cooped up with a bunch of crazy people in the city hotel. Which one of these is more important to you, or which one do you want me to work on for you? Is a good open-ended and clarifying question. So you can see in this example, I've done a bunch of things all at once, which you will be doing in your interviews. So I've used summarizing, because I'm using the client's own words, using the client's language, asked an open-ended question, and I had a strengths-based focus on the client's goals. So this is an example of how all of these skills start building together to help you conduct an interview that's going to be successful for the client, successful for you, and helpful and clear to both of you about the service delivery you're trying to engage in. I'm going to stop for a second to ask if anybody has any questions so far. Okay, because I can't quite get to the chat. Can I see the chat? Okay, so no chat questions. Oh, sorry, I just made my chat too big. Let me get that off. Let me put that away. Dang it. Bam, there it goes. Okay. The next one is more from your textbooks, and it's about use of self. So it's in Miley, chapter 3, and it's also all over the Morgaine text. Because use of self is the sum total of your self-awareness about your biases and who you are, your social location around your race, ethnicity, gender, age, access to power, etc. Your skill set of all these things that you're learning, how you use that for consumer advocacy, and your personal practice style. So it makes you unique from every other social worker. Even if you read the exact same things and ran the exact same role plays and turn in the exact same assignments, when you get out there and interact with even the same client, you're going to do it differently based on who you are, how you feel that day, who the client reminds you of, your awareness of your own biases, the particular parts of the skill set that you've picked up from class that might be different from your partner, and really just your personal practice style, who you are becoming as a social work professional. So it helps you understand how to engage a particular client or a specific client or consumer group. So we'll talk a lot throughout the program of use of self because we're just introducing it here. So it's the sum of you, your self-awareness, and your skill set. Client engagement is something we're also going to start talking about now, but we're going to talk about throughout the course of your 2 years. This is a really ongoing and dynamic process on behalf of all the folks that you interact with and the groups that you interact with as social worker. And it's the combination of your use of self and your relationship building skills. You really use the two of those to help the consumer articulate what they want and how they're going to achieve their goals. So client engagement, consumer engagement is always about how you're able to relate to that person and help that person relate to you and your organization in order to achieve the job of getting them the goals that they are seeking. These last two and a next couple of skills are ones we're just starting to scratch the surface of. So I'm not expecting you to be super skillful in it. I am expecting you to ask open-ended questions or know when you should have, but we're just scratching the surface of these at this point in the semester, and this point in the social work program. So increasing cultural awareness is the next skill. This is in the Miley text, chapter 3, and it's in all of the Morgaine text. Social work used to talk about cultural competency, and hopefully most social workers have dropped that from their lexicon, because I don't believe, and most social workers now don't believe, that you can be competent in somebody else's culture that you haven't lived in and you're not a part of. I'm competent in my culture that I lived up in the region of the United States I grew up in. My partner is very different from me culturally. I would never call myself competent in her culture, even though it's super familiar to me, because that's when we make mistakes, and mistakes that offend people. So you want to have awareness of other cultures. The goal in cultural awareness is multi-part, right? It's about personal biases and values. So you need to be self-aware of your own biases and values so that you eliminate the influence of them in your interactions. I don't think it's possible to eliminate all of our biases because some of them are unconscious, but it's our job as social workers to work towards eliminating how those biases influence us and the way we work with others. Combine this with openness and interest and inquisitiveness about your consumer and client's context, including language and other parts of their culture. You know, their food, their dress, gender roles, religion, how they do family, all of that is part of culture. And the skill is developing dialogue and interviewing skills that place that consumer's construct of reality at the center of the conversation. So you're using open-ended questions, using the client's language, so that you're becoming much more aware of what's important to them in their context with their family and their culture. And cultural awareness, sorry, my computer's really sensitive. Um, Cultivating cultural awareness and cultural humility also specifically rejects the idea that different practices are deficient or abnormal simply because they're different. The value of social work is that there is no one culture that should dominate all others. That does have a particular political paradigm. It certainly functions in our country in many different ways, but in social work, the consumer's context is the most important context for that consumer, and our job is to adapt to that as we can, balanced with legal mandates for safety. Certainly in protective services for adults and children, and suicide and homicide, we've got to make sure people are safe. And there are cultural aspects that come into play there, but cultural awareness and cultural humility rejects the idea that different practices are deficient or abnormal. The next skill is focusing on strengths and becoming a strengths-based social worker. If you looked at our integrative practice matrix, you're starting to hear now some of the language and some of those foundational concepts and practice approaches, and strengths-based social work is one of them. So strengths-based social work focuses on the view that clients have hopes, dreams, potential, and instead of viewing them from a deficit or pathology-based perspective. So viewing people from, you're a human being with dignity, I need to treat you with respect. What are your goals? Let's help you develop the capacity and the ability to achieve those goals. So using strengths-based approach means using interviewing skills to help consumers construct a more positive future based on their goals. And you work to cultivate client strengths and resources at all levels of intervention with the individual, the family, the community, society, et cetera. And you really use these to build an empowerment-based approach to social work practice. That's really the ultimate goal, is that you're standing beside a consumer and helping them on their particular path to the future they would like to achieve, and helping them do that in a self-sufficient way with like-minded people that they wish to associate with. That's part of empowerment. And this leads into client-centered goals. Social work places value on the client's goals over the worker agency goals, again, balanced with legal mandates for safety. And even though, like in CPS, you're going to have a court-mandated care plan that might say the parent needs to go to parenting classes. Well, even though that's a court-mandated goal and it's not necessarily the consumer's goals, how they go about doing that can be where they build in their own goals. Where do they want to go for those services? How do they want to approach those services? How do they want to present themselves when they go to parenting classes? What do they want to get out of parenting classes? This is ways to build in their own goals, even within a mandated care plan. The way you get to client-centered goals is to use all the skills we've been talking about: open-ended questions, client's language, use of self, summarizing, paraphrasing, and your engagement skills to find out what the consumer or client wants to achieve from interacting with you. And it does require cultural sensitivity and awareness, and an awareness of your agency's biases and the power differentials that exist between you and the consumer, and you and your supervisor, and you and your agency, and knowing how to navigate all that. Again, I want you to start scratching on these skills in this exercise today and this midterm. We're going to focus more on client-centered goals for the second half of the semester, so you get many more skills around doing that. I'm going to stop sharing right now because I just babbled all the way there through all those skills really fast. What questions do you have about any of those skills or any other part of the assignment? Okay, nobody's saying anything and there's nothing up in the chat either. So I got through that a whole lot faster than I did in the first class. So let me see how many people are here. 12, 13, 14, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Okay. What I'm going to do is put you into groups of 2. I think this will still work better as a dyad and will work better with the time that we've got.